Over the past year, I've noticed that there's been some hesitation or maybe just unfamiliarity with using Git for your projects. And I just wanted to give you guys a quick overview of my process and workflow for how I set up branches and that sort of thing for every project I work on. If you have experience with Git, this is probably going to be a little too rudimentary for you, but either way, stick around. All right, the first thing we'll do is let's just create a new project. Okay, so we've got our path, and go ahead and create folder there so that it actually did create a folder. Okay, and let's go ahead and create an edit. Okay, so this is our very basic empty Godot project. We haven't done anything yet. And the first thing I like to do is always make an initial commit. It doesn't matter what project or whatever you're doing, just commit something to establish a baseline so that you can always fall back to a starting point in your project in case you mess something up early on. But what I want to look at first is the GITIGNORE file, and I believe Godot supplies one for you. Let's just see if we have a GITIGNORE file. So when you create a new project, Godot is actually going to create a default GITIGNORE for you. So let's just take a look at that. So right now it's just gonna ignore anything under the .godot folder. The GITIGNORE is just basically a way to ignore files or folders that you don't want to check in or commit to your repository. So if you have a team of people working and maybe you have some configuration files or maybe some temporary directories, like a lot of these projects or games that you work on, regardless of whatever it is, framework, application, or whatever, there's always going to be local temp files that you don't want to commit to your central repository. So that's what you want to list in here, things that you don't want to commit. You can actually Google for Godot GITIGNOREs, and there's this like GITIGNORE like global project that has all these GITIGNORE files, example files that you can use. So if you want to add some more files that you want to ignore into this file here, this GITIGNORE file, you can also just check out what some other people are doing. Like we might not have any of this for our project, but as your project grows, you're probably going to notice like, oh, I don't really want to check this in. Or maybe you import a library and the developer will say, yeah, make sure that you ignore these files. You don't want to commit these in your repository. So you would just add that to here. A lot of times I'll create like a distribution or dist folder for builds within my repository. So I'll usually just add a like /dist entry here to that file. So that's what GITIGNORE is. The other file I want to look at is the .GITATTRIBUTES. And what this file does is it enables Git's large file storage. So it allows you to keep your repositories at a nice size so you're not just sitting there waiting for all these assets that are large in size. Like you can see those image texture size, file sizes get really large, right? Well, instead of just sitting around and waiting for all those to download, this is a way to offload those resources or assets to another server, right? So if you use GitHub, they actually provide this service for you. And they give you about 2 gigabytes for free under their like free tier. So if you get beyond that, you're gonna have to probably pay for some upgraded tiers to store that kind of data. And maybe GitHub isn't the best place to actually store your game repositories. I know there's some other services out there that may offer a cheaper tiering system for their LFS storage, but it's just a really nice way to keep your repositories lightweight, so you can easily transfer your scripts and files throughout your team. And then maybe not everybody needs the models. Maybe you have some backend guys on your team and they don't need the large assets, so they can actually choose to ignore to download those resources if they want to, but the people that are working on modeling can actually download those resources. So this GITATTRIBUTES file, like this is an example that Godot has in one of their repositories. You can see they actually flag the PNGs and like jar files, executables, and icons and that sort of thing. Well, you can imagine this would grow with as you add more textures or video resources like cutscenes and stuff to your video game. You'd probably want to list those here. And what it does is it actually creates a text pointer to the actual resource wherever GitHub decides to store it on their servers, so that when you need to download it, you can download it at that point. And for those of us that are familiar with GitHub Desktop or maybe source tree, you'll get that prompt that's like, when it detects a large video or image file, it's like, hey, you're trying to commit these large files. Do you want to enable large file storage? And, you know, of course you want to do that, but because it's actually going to be a limit, and because these like resources can grow pretty quickly, you're going to have to keep an eye on how large and how much space you're taking up, because it's probably going to cost you some money to manage those files and resources. So if you really want to get fancy, you can actually like create your own remote service or backend server to store those files on there. I'm not going to cover that in this video, but if you want to do something cheap, you can probably spin up your own server and stick them out there and just have this like LFS stuff fetch from there instead. But you know, there's some other game related project storage services out there. I'm not going to cover those in this video, but you know, in general, Git is like GitHub, Bitbucket, or like GitLab, or some of the big ones that a lot of us use. And they of course will offer these, you know, large file storage tiers for most of those projects. So it's a really nice way to keep your repositories lightweight, so it keeps those download speeds fast and you're not overburdening the project with unnecessary large files. Just keep an eye on that. It's really important. I actually recommend turning it on and at least to get used to how to use it. Otherwise, you're going to have these large video or resource files in your GitHub repository, and that's just really not good practice there. And the one they give you by default, let's just take a quick look. It just has this like normalization for end of line formatting. If you started to add more resources to your project, like videos, you actually have to tag these files in this. Like you can just edit this Git attributes and list them in there. But if you're using source tree or something like that, and you try to commit a large file, it'll actually prompt you, so you can turn it on. But I still think you have to add these manually. So just keep that in mind. That's what GITIGNORE and Git attributes do. They're really just like basic configuration. And I think they're really important for video games, because video games and the projects can grow really quickly and get out of hand. So do a deep dive on your own time and dig into like what these Git attributes and large file storage and GITIGNORE things are, because I'm just scratching the surface with it here. When I first open a project, I usually just stub out some folders. And I'll just create like a basic startup scene. And then I usually just try to run it really quick, and then it'll prompt you, is this the main scene? I'll just go ahead and select current and run it. Great. So we've got a working project, and I know it might seem silly, but I really like to make an initial commit on a project. It establishes that, you know, baseline, and you can see over here I have the assets, scenes, and scripts folder. You can go ahead and add your, maybe you have a specific game icon you want to add here, or a splash screen or something. If you have some things that you just want to stub out really quick to get the very minimum base project set up, you know, this shouldn't be a lot of time here, that you should be able to get this done fairly quickly. And once you reach that point, do that initial commit and don't delay it too long. Like, don't spend hours working on your project, then do your initial commit. It's kind of bad practice. It's always good to have that starting baseline. And it might not make a lot of sense as a beginner, but like if you've worked on larger projects, you know that it can be a pain, and because you might mess something up really early on, and it's just nice to have a clean starting point that you might want to use for other projects, right? It's not even just for this project. So if you've established that like default scenes and assets that you want to have for every project, well, go ahead and set this up, do that commit, and that's your initial commit that you can use for all your other projects. So let's just see what that looks like. I use source tree. It's a really nice Git visualizer tool. I like how they show their branching structure in the graphs. If you prefer GitHub Desktop or maybe GitLab, go ahead and feel free to use those or whatever you're comfortable with. So what I like to do, because Godot has created a project for you, we still have to create the Git project. So I'm going to go ahead and just add existing local repository. So once I've found my project, I store it under this repos folder, and here's the actual project structure. So this Godot project is inside here. So you can see here's the project file right there. I just select the parent folder and hit open, and yep, I confirm that the path looks okay, and you just create a new repository. And then we'll go ahead and open that, and there it is. So this is the default view that source tree has. And you can see there's no branches yet. The branch tab is empty. And if we open up the terminal again, and if we check really quick, you can now see that there's a Git folder. So we know we have a working Git project, so we're good there. And the first thing you want to do is go ahead and stage everything. And just clicking this allows everything to go into the stage category. And staging is kind of like pre-committing. It's just a nice workflow item. And I'll get into this a little bit more in a minute, but go ahead and just stage your files so that they're ready for commit. And you can see we have our git attributes, our GITIGNORE, maybe your icon and that sort of thing. And then of course the project and startup scene. So let's just go ahead and hit commit, and we'll do init commit. And if you do have this set up like it's a base project, go ahead and just fill out some details there in your commit and go ahead and hit commit. Great, so now there it is. You have your initial commit, and you can see that it gives it a commit number right here. So you know you're in there and you're on the main or master branch right here. And here's the files that you first committed. And once I have that initial commit set up, because I know I'm gonna be working on a project, maybe you have a team. It's not terribly important if you're working by yourself, but anytime you work on an item, like you're trying to create some feature or you're working on a topic for your game or your project, always create a new branch. But let's just pretend you have a team and you have like 3 people at least working. I like to create a dev branch. And this is like where everybody kind of collaborates together. They don't actually work on the dev branch, they work off of the dev branch. And then you reserve the main or master branch for like big milestones. Like maybe you finally got something accomplished, like you got chat working, or maybe you got shooting working in your game or something like that. And you can have those milestones. What a lot of people like to do is keep the main branch for releases. So you'll never commit to the master and main branch until you actually have a release, like 1.0 or whatever, 2.0 or that sort of thing. So what you want to do is, if you're going to set up the initial project, so let's say I need to, what's something that I can do? I'm going to go over here and hit new branch, build basic scene, and I'm going to go ahead and just hit create branch. And now I have a branch off of the dev and master. They're all at the same commit level. So nothing's really changed. You're just kind of labeling it in this, Git fashion or whatever. But the second I make a change, the branch that I'm currently on, as you can see, it's highlighted right here. It's going to branch off, and you're going to be able to see that graph grow here. What's nice about doing it this way is that if you do have a small team or even a large team, you can all be working on your own feature, or what we call topic branch. And so everybody can be working on their own. And then when they're ready, they merge back in those changes and they all merge them back into dev. And maybe you have someone on your team that's like designated to do that. You guys can work that out within your team respectively. But if you're by yourself, I still recommend doing this because it's a very organized way to keep everything straight in what you're working on. So every time you work on something new, just create a new branch and work off it. Yeah, you can work off it for a while. You don't have to get crazy with it. But once you're like, yeah, okay, I feel really solid about these changes, go ahead and merge them back into dev and then create a new branch and continue working off that branch. And then once you made those changes complete, and then you commit them back to dev. And then once you're ready to release a version of your game, go ahead and merge those back into the main branch. So right now I don't have any changes. If you look at file status, there's nothing here. There's no, you can see I don't have anything to click on. And let's just go over to our startup scene and let's just build out like a basic UI. Maybe we just want to make a button here, or let's just do a VBox. Okay. And let's just add a button. We'll just say do stuff, and we'll go ahead and save that. And if we go back over to our repository, all of a sudden this new graph node appears and it says uncommitted changes. And so this view you're going to get really familiar with if you're using any kind of visualizer. GitHub Desktop does it very similar to this, and GitLab, and all these like visualizer tools that you can download for Git. I really prefer the source tree version of it, but that's just my bias. I've been using it for years. But you can see here, okay, I made a change to the scene. And over here, you can see that we added this VBox container and a button. And now maybe this isn't a great example because it's not code, but let's go ahead and maybe we can add a script to our startup scene, and we'll just add a new script, startup under, let's put it under the scripts folder. Go ahead and hit open, and we'll create that script and we'll hit save. Now, if we come back over there, as you can see, oh, it's this little question mark purple thing. Well, that just means it's a new file. It detected that something's been added. The yellow in source tree just means that you've made a change to a file. So right now I have this and the startup script and the startup scene. One thing I wanted to highlight about using these visualizers is I like how you can visually see what's happening and where your files are and what kind of status they're in. I prefer that. There's some gurus out there that just want to stay on the command line or terminal. That's totally fine. I actually recommend starting there so you kind of get an idea of how to do Git from a terminal and then switch over to the visualization like once you've got the hang of it. Because ultimately, like if you're going to be working on any sizable team, someone's going to have to switch over to the manual mode at some point to work out some kind of kinks or bug in the merging process. But anyways, one thing I wanted to point out here is that there's this thing called index or staging. And what it's like a pre-commit staging area. And I think GitHub Desktop calls it index. I just can't remember. So what I like to do is once I've established a certain amount of changes, I'll go ahead and check those to add it to the stage or index. And I can actually keep working at that point and see what those changes are. And it might be a little difficult to see right now. You know, if this is new to you, it's hard to see. You really have to just experience it. But like if I come back over here and let's just say we want to do something for the button. Let's just say do stuff. And like, let's just pretend this is like a serious amount of changes and your button does something. Well, you come back over here and you can actually review those specific changes. Like maybe you've already made several changes to some file somewhere and you're comfortable with those changes, you tested them, but you want to make sure you establish that quick baseline, but you're not ready to quite commit because that like specific thing you're working on isn't really ready. This is a great way to track those changes between what you want to do and what you've done and known works. So what I like to do is when I'm like making progress, I add them to the staging area or the index, and then I continue to make changes. And once I've got those changes wrapped up, like, okay, I tested these changes, I feel comfortable with them, go ahead and add them. And then it also tags them on here. So if you look under here, you can see now that do stuff method is up there. And of course, if it's an existing file, it'll show up like this. Like you can see here, I removed, this thing got removed in this scene configuration file and all this stuff in the green got added. What's great about this is that you can continue to work, you can continuously establishing like known tested baselines without having to commit yet. And I really like that because it allows for my workflow to go pretty quickly. Usually what I do is I'll spend about like anywhere from like a day to a week working with one commit, which isn't really great practice. So hear me out before you take that as advice. But what I'll do is I'll like make a bunch of changes, like if I'm trying to make a menu or something, and I'll just keep staging them right here in this area. So I keep establishing that like good tested baseline, and then I'll just keep adding from this area once I make changes, and they just basically come up in here. And then once I'm ready, then I go ahead and make a commit. So let's go ahead and do that. So now that I have my changes, I know I'm happy with these changes. I'm gonna go ahead and commit that. So I hit commit. So what this is going to do is we're gonna actually commit and it's gonna create a little commit ID to this branch right here. So right now we're all in sync. We have these uncommitted changes that are ready to be, that are in the stage thing that are ready to be committed. So let's go back to file status and we'll just say like added do stuff button. Make sure you always give yourself an idea of what you're doing. And then down here, if you have more details, you can add out other changes that you added. And again, this is like kind of based on what your team preferences are. Like when you're starting out, it's okay because you're by yourself. But once you get more than one person working, have that talk, figure out like how you guys want to handle this and set like some team policies for what your commits are going to look like. And maybe your branch names, like a lot of times team names or branch names will actually refer back to a ticket number or like a Jira ticket number in there. So you actually just name it that. And so I like to have mine like identifiable, like, oh, I'm building a basic scene. So it's easy for me to understand versus just a number or maybe both together. Anyways, establish that with your team before you get started. Okay, so now we've committed. And if we look back at our branches, our graph is extended up. We no longer have any uncommitted changes. So here's that dev and main branch down here on this commit. And our topic branch, this build basic scene, now has a new commit on it. And you can see what's in the commit. Here's the files that are in that commit. So if you had 100 files, they would all show up right here and you can click through them and see what's changed. So let's just make another change to that. Let's actually connect up this button and see what that looks like. Button pressed, go ahead and pick it. Well, nope, wrong one. Do stuff, go ahead and connect that, save it. And what will happen is now we have another set of uncommitted changes. You can see right there, it's in green. Well, let's say I didn't want to do that. Let's say maybe and I'm feeling lazy and I don't feel like going over here and doing it manually, or maybe you have another code in your change, you can actually come over here and hit discard hunk. And then what it'll do is it just basically eliminates those changes. So if you come back over here, oh, some files have changed on the disk. Do you want to reload? So, you know, Godot will notice that you unbound that press thing and you can see it's no longer pressed there. So that's really handy. Like if you have a scenario where you have like a big file and maybe you had some debug statements in there, or maybe you put in some test functionality that you don't really want to commit. Always go to that uncommitted tab and review your changes. And if there's anything in there, just go ahead and hit that discard changes or discard hunk. And it's a really quick way to do it. I would recommend doing it in the code, but you know, always check it before you commit to make sure that you're not forgetting to remove any testing code or anything that doesn't need to be in your repository. If you actually look at the official documentation that Git provides you, they actually give you an idea of basic workflows, which is exactly what I'm telling you today. So I'm not just making this up. There's this nice little diagram they provide here where you can see there's this like master branch where the commits come off, and that's your development branch. And then off the development branch, there's several commits that have established working copies of your code or saved copies of your code along the way. So these are just like commits back or merges back to that development branch. And here you can see that topic branch that's coming off that latest commit off the development. And eventually you'll merge that topic back into development and then development back into your master branch. And if you look back at the source tree visualizer graph, you can see that's exactly what I'm doing. Right now we have the same commits though. So the master endeavor on the same branch or the same commit number. And then our branch, our topic branch is coming off of that. So that's exactly what this is showing right here. So I went ahead and made some additional changes. I added a gameplay scene and a gameplay script. Again, they're just dummy scripts for now, just to illustrate how this is going to work. And I want to go ahead and commit those. So let's just create another commit. And I just said like added gameplay scenes and script. Okay, hit commit. So now you've committed your gameplay scene and your startup script. And you generally wouldn't do this in one branch. This would probably be several branches over the course of a month or two, or however big your game is, right? And I want to touch on that for a second. It's really good practice to commit often. Like for example, a lot of times as a solo dev, you'll be working for a week and you get a lot of changes done and you're like, great, I got this feature working. Okay, I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to take a break. And a week later, a week goes by and you have this mountain of changes and you're like, oh, cool. Where did I leave off? And your game's working great. And then you work for like another 2 or 3 days and then something breaks or something goes wrong. And now you're having to sort through not just what you did this week, but whatever you did the last 2 weeks or the last week since you last committed. I just really want to reiterate that it's a really good idea to commit often so that you don't have these large chunks of code that you have to sift through when things go south. And especially with libraries, like anytime you add a library or some kind of add-on or something big to your project that is from an outside source, make sure you have a solid commit. I would definitely have a solid commit at least into the dev branch there, because if that breaks and you're on a branch with a lot of other changes, it just becomes a nightmare to deal with. And I would also recommend doing this and making sure that you have a solid commit on dev when you're upgrading versions. Like if you're upgrading from Godot version, 3 dot something to 4.x, make sure you have those solid commits before you do that upgrade, because it's going to get really hairy, because now you're going to have like library files that were updated. It's going to break a lot of your code, probably because there's breaking changes between those major versions. And now you're going to have your custom code mixed in, or your latest changes mixed in with their breaking code. And you're like, well, what did I break and what did they break? It just becomes a nightmare over time, trust me. So if you're starting out, get into the habit of committing often. It's a great way to make sure that you're always on the golden path for your project. So let's say you've made a bunch of changes to your branch, your topic branch, and you feel comfortable merging into dev. Your team will probably have some kind of review process where somebody else will at least do a peer review on your code. Maybe not, maybe you're solo dev and you don't care, but I definitely recommend after you've hit a certain like threshold of I'm comfortable with this branch, I'm comfortable with this feature set that I'm working on, this code's been tested, it's a good idea to go ahead and commit back to dev. Let's say you have a repository on GitHub, because a lot of us are using GitHub. Let me know in the comments which Git provider you're using, or maybe you're using some other game specific tool. So if we go over to GitHub, let's just go ahead and create a repository really quick. So I know I'm doing this a little out of order, but I want to connect my repository that I have locally to this one I just created. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this HTTPS version, and I'm gonna come down to remotes, and let's add a new remote, and let's just call it origin, and I'm gonna paste in the path of that. And you'll go ahead and fill out this section with your username and password, and then you'll be able to connect that remote however it's required. Okay, so once you have your origin remote created, it basically just points back to here. I wanna go ahead and push out these changes. Let's push out all of our branches. So to do that, you hit this push button and you select all your branches, hit OK. And of course you're entering your password. And once you've entered your password, and it actually pushes out to that remote repository here, over here in GitHub, and you can see the 3 branches are on the origin now. And if you can come back here, you can actually see that it's also origin / build basic scene. So origin main master and origin dev. And so it creates a copy, or it basically pushes out those commits that are mirrored on your GitHub repository. So if I hit refresh on this page, now you can see we have a repository. Great, that's exactly what we expected. And of course it pushed out, it like defaulted to the scene that I'm on, and you can change the main scene to be this master branch or whatever. It says it's default here, which is not correct. You don't want this to be your default branch. So let's actually just change that really quick. Let's switch it, there we go. And then we'll hit master branch and then hit update. I understand, whatever. Great, okay, so we'll go back to our code. And now that it's set up correctly, here's your main branch, and then there's your dev branch, and then there's this build basic scene branch. And you can see here, it says, oh, you had a recent push. Do you wanna compare and do a pull request? And yes, we do, because this is what you would do in a team. If you're by yourself, you can just come over here, and I believe you would just like come over to dev, and then you can just say merge build basic scene into dev, and it would actually merge those changes directly into dev. And then you can just delete that branch and create a new one and continue working on the next feature you want to work on. But because you're in a team and you want to see what that looks like when you're in a small team, you would come over here and create a pull request. And of course you would, here's your title, and you can give it some description and talk about what your changes were in here. My changes, and then go ahead and create pull request. And it'll check to see if it's available to merge into the master branch. Now, I don't want to merge into master, so that was kind of a mistake. So let me back up really quick, and let's go back over here. Let's actually delete this. So now you can see like how mistakes can be made. So always double check what you're doing. How do I delete this? I think I can go in here and let's see. I think I should just close pull request. I don't want to merge it. I don't want to do anything with that. So let's go ahead and create a new pull request, or let's see if I can go back to code. Yeah, it doesn't show me anymore. Okay, so if I go back to pull request, you hit new pull requests, and I don't want to go from there to there. I want to go from dev to build basic scene. There we go. Now we can say create pull request. Sorry about that. My changes, oops, my changes did stuff. Create pull request. Again, it'll check for if it's available to merge. And of course it is, because it's just me working on it. So if you want to review those changes, like if you're someone else on the team that's doing a peer review, you can just hit file changed or files changed, and you can review all the changes that person made. You can come in here and add comments right in line, like this is bad or whatever your comments are. And that sort of thing. And then of course you can require the developer to actually resolve these changes before they commit or that thing. And you can set like a person who's an authority to manage the actual merges and that sort of thing. But that's getting a little out of scope for this. But anyways, so we have this pull request that I'm gonna go ahead and just actually merge, just to show you guys that real flow here. I recommend doing squash and merge. And what that does is, if you look here on this branch, this build basic scene, I have 2 commits off this graph, and I don't want to see like 1,000 commits in my main repository, because these will actually stay there. They'll actually be 1, 2, 3. Well, because this is under one topic, I just want to see 1 commit for that. I just want to see 1 commit for that on my dev and main branches. So the way to do that is to do squash and merge. So it basically takes those whatever amount of commits you have under that one topic branch, and it mushes them down into one big one. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that, and we'll squash and merge, confirm. Yep, so you can see it actually took those 2 added do stuff, those 2 commits, and put it into one. See, added do stuff button and then added gameplay scene. You can see they separated them out. I'm just gonna go ahead and clean it up a little bit and confirm. successfully merged. And you can go ahead and delete branch. I'm going to hold off on that for a second. If we come back to the code, dev has had recent changes, and now it prompts you to merge in the master, but because this isn't a release or anything, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to leave that alone. But if you go over to the dev branch, you can see, oh, look, now you've made changes. Now you can see there's a script folder and a scenes folder. Or if you go back to the main branch, you can see that those aren't there. You can see that the scripts folder isn't there. So you can tell that we've added some changes that are actually important to the repository. As you can see, here's the gameplay and startup scripts. That's how you do a merge request. And then if you come back over here and you do a fetch, you can update what's going on, and it'll actually tell you what's going on. Oh, look, you have a one commit that's been merged in. You need to pull that down. So because I'm on that branch already, I've already switched over to that. I'm gonna go ahead and do a pull, and we'll just go ahead and merge those changes immediately. Now this becomes interesting when you actually have ongoing changes locally on your machine. Like you've been working for a week and you've got all these developers who are pushing out changes to dev. You're gonna need to like reestablish your like baseline on top of their changes. And so if you say commit merge changes immediately, you go ahead and do that. If there's a collision, like a conflict between some file that you worked on, maybe you guys worked on the same file or scene or something, you as that developer who is like trying to resolve those conflicts is the one that's responsible to resolve those conflicts, right? And you can probably do that over here in that pull review section as well. But a lot of times what you can do is once you pull those changes, you'll see like a little warning here that's like, hey, you have unresolved conflicts. You need to figure that out. So you need to go through and figure out like, okay, which are my changes or what changes need to go where and that sort of thing. And you can sort that out. But that's like for a whole other topic, and you guys can, figure that out. Okay, so as you can see here, now our graph has branched off. So we have 2 commits for dev. Actually, I should say we have 1 and 2 instead of 1, 2, 3. That would have happened if we didn't squash those changes down. So now we've established we've got a good dev branch. It's got our topic branch in there. We don't need this branch anymore. You don't need it. You saved off your changes. So what I like to do is delete it. But sometimes, it'll give you a warning like, oh, you have uncommitted changes because there's some like disconnect between GitHub and your local version of it. I don't want to delete the remote branch. You can. So it deleted the local branch, and you can see here, this is the origin of the branch, the origin version. So let's go over here and let's find that branch. So now that I'm on this branch, I'm actually going to go look over at the pull requests, and I want to filter by closed. Here's that one that I messed up in the beginning that we can just ignore. But this is that one we just merged. And if you're the manager of this repository, you can probably just delete that branch and clean up your code. And now when you come back here and you hit fetch, it's going to clear that out. So now you have a nice clean graph in your repository. You've got that whole branch or week or month worth of work from that developer just boiled down to merge with that merge and squash right in one request. And it's or one commit, I should say, and it's going to keep your repository clean if you can do it that way. And if we look under our origin, you can see we're back down to our dev and master branch respectively. So that's basically a typical project Git workflow that I use for all my projects. I have a dev and main branch established, and then anytime I want to make a additional change, I just hit new branch and add player. And then we'll go ahead and hit create branch. And then I start making changes, and then I make those changes. And then when I'm ready, I create a pull request if you're working with the team. If I'm working locally, I don't create pull requests because I'm the reviewer myself, you're a solo indie dev or whatever. So you can just come over here and merge that. Maybe let me just show you that really quick, just so I'm not missing anything. We'll go ahead and reload because our project is reloaded under source tree. And if we can see here, let's go ahead and open up our gameplay scene, and we need to reload that as well because it's been changed. And let's just add another function here. Okay, and let's say I made some more changes and I'm a solo dev, so I don't care about doing pull requests. I'll go ahead and just commit this. And if I want to just merge that into dev because I'm trying to be organized, I'll go ahead and check out dev by just double click on it and then just merge, add player into dev and hit OK. And now the local dev branch has merged in that add player branch. So now you can see this little one push symbol. So that just means that you're one ahead of this dev branch. And if you're one behind, it would be like one down arrow or whatever, because other developers have committed some changes to that branch. So what you can do is, if you want to keep your dev branch on origin up to date, like you do have a GitHub account, but you're working by yourself and you want to make sure that you keep your changes up to date, go ahead and just push those changes out. And of course, just make sure that dev branch is selected, hit OK. And now you can see origin dev is equal to the same commit as the add player branch that we just did that really quick change onto that script. So you can see I clicked on that and you can see that commit. It's all the same. It's on the same commit. And I really like doing this when you're working by yourself, because GitHub creates a backup of all your work that you're doing. So, and this is a nice way to keep everything organized. So then once you're done using that branch, you can just go ahead and hit delete, add player branch. You don't need it. It's a local branch. I never had to push it out because I wasn't doing any work, but if you are working on a substantial change, I do recommend pushing them out to origin so that you don't lose all your code. If your computer breaks or crashes or somebody eats it or whatever, you have a backup there. And if you go and if you want to double check over in GitHub, we can hit code, and it's giving me a 404 because we deleted that branch. So we'll just go back to the dev branch. And you can see 55 seconds ago, which is what I just submitted, I added that script changes to the, I think it was the gameplay, and you can see there more stuff has been added, and that is of course under the dev branch. And then when you're ready to merge into the main branch, it's the same process. You can do a pull request or just come over here to source tree and merge it manually. So that's pretty much it for my workflow. I really like this idea of, you have that big main master branch that's only for releases or like very critical milestones in your project. And then you use your dev branch for your, smaller team to, of course, like you guys all like build together off that. And then you use those topic branches that everybody in the team can work off independently. And then they merge back to dev. And then once dev is ready, then you merge that back into the main branch. Let me know if you enjoyed this, or if this is helpful, or maybe you have a different type of workflow. This is really just scratching the surface of it. Git is a monster. You can do a ton of stuff with it. And I know there's a bunch of different workflows, but really you just need to establish what your team wants to do and the way your team wants to organize it. And once you've come to an agreement on that, it makes it much easier to manage the growth of your project. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe. I got a lot more on the way. Thanks for watching.